There was another button I had to press.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to L.I.N.K Live. My name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive. And I'm here with my lovely ladies. If you want to go around the room.
Hi, I'm Brielle and I'm the Associate Editor.
And I am Mackenna Morales, and I am the Assistant Editor.
And thank you for joining us. And I'm glad we worked this out because about 5 minutes ago, I had no video. And then when my video came on, I was upside down. So keep an eye out for the bloopers on that. It's always something with me. As you can see, we have a guest. I'm very excited. We have Kathy Fulton, the Executive Director at the American Logistics Aid Network. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So today we're going to kind of talk about supply chain challenges with regards to natural disasters, especially, hurricanes as it is hurricane season. Natural disasters happen. They're kind of one of those things you can't really plan for, but you should prepare for. So we're going to kind of just dive right into some, questions that we've kind of devised for you. First off, Kathy, what are some things that companies, should be doing to better prep their supply chains for natural disasters, whether it's now or in a couple months, especially with the pandemic going on as well?
Yeah, so 2020 has been quite a year for disasters kind of coast to coast. And so some of the successes we're seeing where businesses are doing well are businesses who've really taken time to understand their supply chains. They've gone back, they've looked at who their suppliers are, and not just who their suppliers are, but who their suppliers are. It's a mouthful. But really doing that mapping all the way back into their supply chain as far as they can go. This has helped them understand risk, not just from the crises or the disaster itself, but risk from where their suppliers are located geographically. If you were early on in the pandemic, if you were someone who was sourcing out of the Asian countries, well, maybe those blanked sailings or regulatory actions were a real challenge for you. So mapping as far back into your supply chain as you possibly can. The other thing is you want to map, kind of downstream from yourself as well to understand what are your customer risks going to look like. Are suddenly people going to stop purchasing your product because they are, quarantining, staying at home because of a pandemic or some other reason? Are you geographically dispersed with your customer base as well? So a lot of things, I think from a mapping perspective, really can do a good job of helping businesses, prepare their supply chains for any type of crisis.
So what other procedures are kind of in place to prepare?
Yeah, so you can look across the entire suite of crisis response, and there are so many things that are done by businesses. There are things that are done by government, and there are things that are done by nonprofit organizations. Our organization, American Logistics Aid Network, really sits at the middle of all of those. So we're working with businesses, nonprofits, government, just to help them be ready, and specifically from a logistics and supply chain perspective. So that could be everything from, helping businesses understand what that mapping looks like, to helping governments understand what the business environment looks like. And quite honestly, that involves mapping as well from a geographic perspective. It also has a lot to do with relationship building. And so when I look at what L.I.N.K's procedures are for preparing for any type of crisis, it's knowing who and where to turn to either get support or to offer assistance. So, we're going to work with all of our nonprofit partners to understand what their needs are. We're going to work with our business community to understand what their capabilities are. And then we're going to bring all of that together. And then that understanding from a logistics and supply chain perspective helps us really map the gaps, understand where there are gaps to be filled, either that our partners in the business community can fill, or helping government emergency management groups understand where they may have to backfill. When you look at kind of the critical supply chains, and I think we're probably going to talk about that in a little bit, but specifically around food. Food supply comes from so many different places into any particular area, and so really understanding where the Pareto portion of that is. Can you keep the calories flowing if there are disruptions in a particular geography, or to something even within your own geography? All of those things are true preparedness actions. Just really understanding what's happening in your what we would call operating environment.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of relates to the question that I have. So, is planning for natural disasters more important in certain industries, like grocery or pharmaceuticals? What do you think?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, because we're coming out of this period of time with COVID where we have these industries that are deemed essential industries, and I'm thinking of the manufacturers of food and the frontline service workers, healthcare. So yes, and all of those things that we need to nourish and hydrate and provide medical care, all of those industries really have a burden of planning. But those industries also can't exist in isolation. You can't operate a warehouse if you don't have power. You can't operate a hospital if you don't have water. All of the what FEMA and DHS call lifelines, food, water, shelter, power, energy, all of those things really work in concert together. So there are dependencies, just across all these lifeline areas. We can't operate our grocery stores without any of those. Oh, and by the way, transportation and warehousing and the logistics and supply chain activities are of critical importance to make sure all of those things continue to operate. So when you say, is planning more important in any one industry? Well, yes, and I'll just say that again. Yes, and we can't think about everything that it takes to keep those critical or essential industries running.
Right. And that's just so essential to the supply chain too, because you can't work without a different sector. You all rely on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how often should companies be updating their supply chain disruption plans?
Yeah. So I love this question, because and I used to be the person who had to write those, kind of corporate emergency response plans. And, when I look back on what I was doing 10 or 15 years ago, boy, I was not doing nearly enough, because it should be ongoing. Any changes that you're making to your business, if you're adding a new customer, you're adding a new supplier, you need to make sure that you've gone through and adjusted your plans accordingly, right? So you need to, when you're talking about testing or updating or anything, you need to make sure that you're looking at those individual components in isolation and doing, some form of test, whether it's, daily or weekly or monthly, whatever that looks like. And then, go to the larger business unit. Is there something that you can do, with, just one of your warehouses or one of your transportation, components that you can do some sort of testing to say, okay, if this road were not available, do we know what our alternate routes are? If this warehouse is unavailable to ship, can we pull from another location? What does that mean in terms of serving our customers? And then finally, at least once a year, you should do some form of system-wide testing, whether that's failing over to your hot site for your data backup, or that's pretending that you don't have power for a certain amount of time. Even if you're just doing some sort of tabletop where you're talking through what would happen in some type of scenario, you're going to be better prepared, because it'll be top of mind for you when that disruption does occur. There is no one who operates any type of supply chain right now who has not experienced some type of disruption to this point. And the success stories we're hearing about, the people who are being, who are more resilient, are those who have some type of plan, those who have had some type of disruption in their past, and they understand the flexibility and the mindset that it takes just to kind of soldier through it.
What are some things that are part of that plan that companies need to really be aware of that maybe weren't a part of these disruption plans maybe 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I would say probably 10 years ago, most people didn't think about if a hurricane comes through a particular area and wipes out power to a neighborhood, how many of your employees live in a particular neighborhood and are now working from home, right? So we went from making sure that all of our buildings where our employees have backup, power generation, to now how do we ensure that our employees have alternate power sources, alternate communication sources if they are distributed and disrupted. I always advocate for taking care of your employees. Thinking about the situation that occurred with Hurricane Laura along the Gulf Coast down in Southwest Louisiana, we kept hearing story after story of businesses who couldn't operate because their employees had to evacuate. It's tough to run a lot of that area is oil refineries and bulk plants and whatnot. You can't do that without power. That's exactly the same for our modern day warehouses. I'm sorry, I said you can't do it without power. You can't do it without people. It's the same for our modern day warehouses and trucking, right? Despite all of the automation that has been put into place, our warehouses still really require people in order to operate them. So if we want people at the end of the supply chain to be able to go to a grocery store and get food, that they need to survive, even if it's outside of the impacted area, we really have to make sure that all of the inputs into that supply chain are taken care of. So that means employers protecting their employees. It means, thinking about, power, alternative power sources. I hear story after story of distribution centers who didn't think that they were really at risk for a big power outage, so they didn't install a generator. Well, then, something catastrophic happens. They're suddenly struggling to figure out how are they going to get things out of their warehouse. Mm-hmm. You can think about all of the lifelines and think about what does that mean? What do those inputs mean for your supply chain? Power, water, fuel, energy, taking care of your people from a food and shelter perspective. I would say just thinking through the DHS FEMA checklist of lifelines and what do those mean for your particular supply chain?
So earlier this year, the American Logistics Aid Network was launched. Can you kind of describe what this network does and how it can help companies obtain logistics relief? Okay.
American Logistics Aid Network, L.I.N.K, has been around since 2005, right after Hurricane Katrina. What we launched earlier this year was our Supply Chain Intelligence Center. And so when I talked earlier about mapping the supply chain, that was one of the things that we said, how can we help people just get a little bit further along? We were at this point in COVID where all of the state governments and even county governments had decided to implement their own non-pharmaceutical interventions. So whether that meant curfews, whether that meant sheltering in place, whether that meant regulatory relief, for transportation for loads of personal protective equipment or whatnot. There was no one place that was cataloging all of that information. So we said, we have all of these sources of information. Let's pull that together in one place. We partnered with an organization called RiskPulse. They have a long history of predictive analytics for supply chains, a lot in the food arena because of the temperature sensitivity of a lot of those food products. And so now we have this beautiful map that tells you what's happening within each state, not just from a COVID perspective, but we also have layers that are provided that tell you about the weather, layers that tell you about earthquakes or anything like that. Any type of natural occurring risk that's out there, we're layering that into the map. And then we're looking at shared infrastructure. So ports and airports, roads and bridges, all of those have are marked within the map, so you can see the impact at any one time from any naturally occurring phenomena. So for example, we back in late August, we had hurricanes Marco and Laura along the Gulf Coast. That also prompted us, we had all the ports and airports mapped, but it also prompted us to say, we know that the nation's fuel supply is really at risk if there's a direct impact on, that zone between Houston and New Orleans. So we added all of the oil refineries and the oil infrastructure that powers the energy for a good portion of the United States. And so that's really a way, it's a free tool. Anybody who wants access can go to our website, alinaid.org/map. They can request access to it, get a chance to get in there and see real time what's happening within their environment. If they want information about how it affects their specific assets, there's an option for them to upgrade, and be able to add kind of their own assets and transportation routes and whatnot. Really cool tool, great partnership with RiskPulse, and it gives not just Alan and our partners, but anybody who wants it, more of that real-time visibility to keep supply chains moving.
Does Alan, I know we've been talking a lot about hurricanes and stuff, but does Alan track other kinds of natural disasters like earthquakes or, big storms that can kind of wipe, when you get buried under feet of snow?
Right. Yeah. So we're concerned with anything that has the potential to disrupt supply chains. And the reason for that, we were formed really by the industry to be their response in disaster. Well, disaster may be, there may be a crisis for one area, or it may be something really catastrophic like a hurricane. But anything that has the potential to disrupt our supply chains. So when you look at fires, fires have the potential to close down interstates, right? Interstates are the way that our supply chains move food. That's the primary flow, right? When you look at earthquakes, they disrupt infrastructure, right? So we're constantly working with organizations who are studying not just what has happened from disasters and responding to earthquakes and responding to any earthquakes that happen, but looking at the future of, the big ones, right? So what's going to happen if Cascadia in the Pacific Northwest, or, the San Andreas in California, or even New Madrid, which is, a lot of people don't know about the New Madrid fault in, kind of Arkansas, Tennessee area. All of those will affect physical property, meaning warehouses and roads and retail outlets. All of those types of disasters will disrupt, and ultimately that means that people who live in those areas will be affected and not be able to get the nourishment, the hydration, and medical care that they need. So we want to work back upstream and help to keep those supply chains moving.
And then I have a question too. How can these companies ensure that their employees are safe? Because you can plan for a hurricane, but you can't plan for a tornado so much. And Marina was just in that huge derecho that hit Iowa and Illinois, and that was very sudden as well. So what can companies do to plan for their employee safety?
Yeah, so I love that, because you can do so much to help your employees, even if it is just pointing them to websites with resources, right? So I love the idea. One of our partners actually brought in all of their employees. Now, in the COVID environment, that you have to figure out how to socially distance this, but they brought in all their employees to their warehouse. They each packed their own kits, right? So they were able, the employer bought all of the things for it. It was, flashlights and shelf-stable meals and water and whatnot. They packed their own, but they also packed one to give away. So it was a really cool way to help not just their employees have that kit ready to go in their houses, but then to offer that same assistance to people in their communities who may not be able to prepare. So things like that, something very tangible with giving them the physical assets that they're going to need should they need to evacuate or should they need to shelter in place. Information, capabilities of working from home. Like you said, we won't know of every crisis that's going to affect us. Yes, tornadoes and earthquakes and all those things are what we in emergency management call kind of no-notice events. Those no-notice events mean that you can't have waited till that moment to prepare. We're just coming from September, National Preparedness Month, and that's a time where, I love to take the 30 days of September and do one thing every day to get prepared. Maybe it's making sure that I have a hard copy of important phone numbers, making sure that I have, even just my prescriptions or whatever it is, just a extra of those, or at least know what a full list of those prescriptions looks like. Being able to have those things, and it's small, right? It takes 10 or 15 minutes a day maybe to do that, but by the end of 30 days, you've gotten so much farther along with your preparedness. I've seen companies take and do contests for their employees, like, hey, build your kit, take a picture of it, show us how you're getting prepared. Just make it fun and interactive, and anything that you can do to encourage or help underwrite that for employees is really, really important.
I think that's fascinating, and I think it's inspiring because it's not, people think preparedness of, in the facility, but like you said, when they have to evacuate and move home, or if they're already working remote, that preparedness has to filter over,
Right.
just because, you need to be prepared. I apologize, Brielle jumped out. We're having quite a day with technology. Speaking of preparedness, I mean, it's just been one of those days. Her computer died, so, it is what it is. And I think you bring up some good points because, you can never really be fully prepared because, like you said, the no-notice, things happen. I mean, we're in a nation now where there's a lot of civil unrest. I know that a lot of stores by me have had to close down because of looting and rioting and protesting and all that. And you can't really, plan that as well, but it does infiltrate into the supply chain. Trucks can't move if you're shutting down streets. Right. And so, I just think it's important that all companies take notice of this. And what other kind of advice do you have for companies, that could better safeguard? I know you brought up some really good points, but, from an overall company standpoint, what kind of advice do you have?
So there's a phrase that a lot of folks in the emergency management community use, and they say "semper gumby." So always be flexible, because you can create you can create the best plans, have them audited and get all of the ISO certifications and everything you need. And then something you hadn't thought of, it can occur. So be willing to take all of your learnings, take all of your experiences and adapt, right? Just be flexible. I know that, after this year with COVID, everyone has learned new adaptation strategies. So just, I would say, build them into your culture. Don't forget them, because if you can survive through 6-8 months of pandemic, you can absolutely deal with a short-term temporal crisis.
I love that. I think that's such a way to live right now, especially with everything going on.
Yeah.
Well, Kathy, I appreciate your time. Everybody, this was Kathy Fulton, Executive Director at L.I.N., or American Logistics Aid Network, and they're doing some wonderful things for the community. So I appreciate all of your efforts that you're doing, just to help people, and special appreciation to all the frontliners out there and everybody who just continues to work day and night to keep these supply chains moving. I know we talk about it every week on Link Live, how important they are. So, and Brielle is back, maybe-ish. We are starting to wind down and say our goodbyes, but you came back just in time. So Kathy, thank you very much for being a part of today's Link Live. And you brought up some good tips. Hopefully everybody takes heed of those as we enter into the winter months and, prepare for what's to come with that. The new snow days.
Yeah.
And thank you, ladies, for
Thank
being
you.
a part of today, and for just sifting through all the technology issues we've had today. Speaking of disruptions. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Kathy. And this is Link Live. We'll see you next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central.
Bye.
Okay.